Hi, welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I am Dustin Pickering, your host and anchor. Today we have Sandra Feen, who was selected as a Bala artist, that is BALA, in 2020, and is the Speak No Evil Monkey in the poetry troupe Concrete Wink with a Chuck Salmons and Ricky Santer. She has been a featured reader in dozens of venues throughout the United States for over 30 years, as well as a former facilitator for two Columbus, Ohio reading series. In addition, she has performed work by Holocaust writers in Susan Millard Schwartz Anahata Music Project. A member of the Ohio Poetry Association, Bistro Poets, former associate editor of Pudding Magazine, and former director of the Ohio Poetry Therapy Writers Group, Sandra has a BFA in creative writing and a BS in English education from Bowling Green State University, as well as an MA in literature from Wright State University. She was one of the 12 teachers selected for a National Endowment of the Arts first Change Course program through Wright State University's Institute on Writing and its teaching, and has presented workshops at conferences such as the Ohio Council of Teachers of English. In the past year, her reading honors include the International Beat Poetry Goddess Festival, sponsored by the National Beat Poetry Foundation, Uncloistered Poetry Series, the Sacramento Poetry Center, James P. Wagner's Bards Poetry Revolution podcast, Penny Taim's Vala, James Bryant's Spofest Open Mic and Poetry Series, Malaka King Albright's Red-Headed Stepchild, and Doc Janning's Owenites, among other notable venues. And her photography publications include Juliet Cook's 13 Mina Birds and Nadia Oroli's Thimble Literary Magazine, along with online poetry and Kristen Garth's Haunted Dollhouse from her Pink Plastic House Literary Magazine. Tandy is the author of Meat and Bone and Fragile Capacities School Poems. Fragile Capacities was nominated for the Ohio Anna Book Award, highlights her 32-year teaching career in an urban school system. The poem Palms Monday was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and her e-chapbook, Evidence of a Starving, will be printed by Bottle Cap Press this summer. Thank you for joining us today, Sandra. I hope you're having a wonderful evening or afternoon. What may you?
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to talk with you. So my first question is, tell us a little bit about your books and the process of seeing them from the actual writing to getting them on into the publishing companies and getting it marketed. What is that process like for you?
Well, my first book is about my teaching career, and I um, heard from several people wonderful things about Diane Borsnick and Night Valley Press, and that she's a
Mm-hmm.
great person to go to if you want to get published. Now, she's a tough publisher. She's not going to publish just anybody, but
Mm-hmm.
she's an excellent publisher, very notable publisher. And I was lucky. She took an interest in my project. She took a real interest in. She has a great interest in schools and mentoring students, and so she was interested in what I had to say about my career. And I have to say, I've met a lot of publishers, and I do have a lot of respect for the publishers I've met. But she is one of the best in terms of really working with me and helping me to perfect my poetry. And my second book is about a very short relationship, a 23-month marriage, and that was published by Luchador Press. And I have great respect for Jason Reberg, and he has a different style in terms of how he works as an editor. But I really learned a lot from him as well because he works closely too. So I learned from the best, but they have different styles. So it was exciting to see how their processes were and how different they were. And I learned, I went from being a teacher for 32 years back to being a student again.
That must be quite a transition. And I'm curious, like, so you've done multiple meetings and open mics, and even been a facilitator. So do you see differences in these different communities between in the different places you've read, and have any particular experiences stood out for you?
Well, one thing I have to say is uh, the creative arts is just truly a tight knit community
Hmm.
wherever you go. Freud says, not I, but the poet discovered the unconscious. And I
Oh,
really
wow.
believe that that is truly very profound. A few
Yes.
words say something so profound. There is a great vulnerability in poetry, and writing poetry and receiving it. And there's a great vulnerability in the arts, period. But boy, the payoff is tremendous. And when
Hmm.
you write and when you become a part of the community of writers and other artists, there just is a universality to it. There is a real community and real intimacy to that. So
A very
whether
unique
I,
community.
yeah, I mean, whether I'm reading in Columbus, Ohio, or I'm reading in Kansas City, Missouri,
Mhm.
or in Connecticut, I'm going to find home somehow within each of those places, just as I find home somehow in each of the poems that I read. Even if it's a poem that's on a difficult topic, I find myself somehow in that poem, and I meet my home somehow. Not to sound melodramatic, but that's how I view it.
Right, absolutely. It's a very comfortable place, and you can be totally yourself. And I find the creative writing communities, the open mics and stuff, they welcome you to be strange and bizarre and eccentric, and read the really outlandish stuff, and be yourself. I mean, and you can be free to do that, and no one's gonna sit down and say, "Oh God, that guy's got purple hair," or anything like that.
You know,
And we're
when you say that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you say that, it makes me think of a great poem by the poet Douglas Gray, who last I know lived in Westerville, Ohio. He
Mhm.
wrote a poem called "Space Aliens Found Performing in Carnival Freak Shows." Great.
Mhm.
That's all
Interesting.
about being yourself,
Hmm.
embracing your. One of the lines is your feathers in your flesh, and embracing
Wow.
creativity, as bizarre and as vibrantly magenta as that might be. So I just kind of echoes what you're saying.
Right, and I like that phrase, "feathers in your skin," or however exactly how you put. But yeah, that's feathers in your flesh. That's really nice. So over in your career, you've been nominated and been appointed things, high positions and so forth in the as a poet and writer. Do you feel that those nominations help your creative output at all, or are they just kind of like nice little you know recognitions that you appreciate?
That's a really interesting, challenging question. I guess I'm not very. It's interesting. I mean, here I enjoy performance, and yet I'm not. It's hard for me when I receive an award or something, because I'm just kind of, I shy away from it. I think
Hmm.
I always feel very humbled by any honor, because there's so many people out there that are
Right.
deserving. I
Mhm.
guess it just kind of gives me more fuel to even work harder. Because
Hmm.
ultimately, it's all about sitting down and doing it,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
embracing it, and hearing other people, and what they say, and their performances, and how that fuels you, and how that benefits your soul and helps you. The
So do
words
you
are nice, but yeah.
Right. They're nice little glitter on you, just a little glitter to stick to you. It is nice to be acknowledged, I guess, and it kind of makes you feel like official, in a way. But I do feel the process as well as a big part of the artistic endeavor. So how have your own aesthetic sensibilities changed throughout your writing career?
Uh, I find, well, when I taught, I've never, um, I've always been writing. I've never stopped writing, but I found that I've had droughts. I've had
Mm-hmm.
lower points. Certainly when I was teaching, it was harder to keep up the impetus because I was trying to teach writing and grading papers and being a teacher was very demanding. But I also felt it was very important to live what I was talking about. I know that I have more time now that I'm retired, but I also I'm finding even more demands on my time,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, because I'm now caregiver of my father who has dementia. So, and yet those moments are moments that fuel your writing too. Those difficult moments are moments that you can write about. So I find that it's always about balance and trying to achieve that and trying to learn when to say no and when to say yes to people. I don't know if that's answering your question exactly or
But
not.
to an extent, I think because as a creative person, a lot of times we work without actual monetary or any kind of award that most people would acknowledge as an award reward for what they do. We do it for the love of it, and I think that's it's good to say yes and no, to be able to say no. It's like, hey, I just don't have the time for this right now. Definitely, and so that's something that a lot of us learn over time. You can't just take on every project, even though you want to.
Yeah, yeah.
So another question related to poetry and as you as a teacher and a facilitator, what have you learned about being a poet and the role of poetry in society through teaching and also through facilitating various readings and working within the poetry community?
It's absolutely crucial. It's life affirming.
Mm-hmm.
The writer, my favorite short story writer is Flannery O'Connor,
Oh,
and it's
absolutely. Cool.
do you like Flannery O'Connor?
Yeah.
And I'm always looking at not only how the creative arts interconnect, but how the genres interconnect. And
Mhm.
one of my favorite quotes of Flannery O'Connor's is, "You have to cherish the world at the same time that you struggle to endure it." That you have to
Wow.
cherish the world at the same time that you struggle to endure it. And I believe 110% that poetry and all the creative arts just fits that bill. We use
Right.
poetry to embrace those moments in life that we cherish and those people in life that we cherish. And we use it to try to endure those difficult, heart wrenching things that we live through. I know I certainly,
Right.
it's been life saving for me. I've
Absolutely.
seen it as a tool, a healing tool that's been life saving for my students, for my dearest friends, even for friends and family members who aren't poets but will say, I've got this one poem that I've saved for 30 years because I'll never forget when so and so gave this to me when I lost this person, and it was just the salve I needed to get me through. There are
Right.
people that just, words matter.
Yes, absolutely.
Words words heal and words hurt.
And definitely, and they can be weapons, and they can be surgical precise material, so and I'm curious again on back on the teaching and poetry and the meaning of poetry. So teaching writing, what have you learned yourself about writing, and have you ever come across students who are just beginning, and how do they react to poetry when they first come across it, or they are learning about writing it?
Generally, well, I taught a class called Writer Seminar as part of my teaching, and I was so lucky to teach it because it was a creative writing class. I had to teach the like the regular, quote, regular English classes as well. But I was
Mhm.
fortunate enough to teach that as an elective. And so some of those kids elected to come in there. So some of them had that interest. Some of them were thrown in there by administrators and they fought it tooth and nail. But I said, if you give it a chance, just give it a chance and see what it might do for you. And some of them were afraid because there was a poetry can be scary to some kids, and some kids embrace it because rap is a form of poetry, for instance.
Right.
But
Tupac is really powerful. Have seen a
oh,
lot of people talk about how Tupac is like just inspires a lot of kids. His
absolutely.
writing.
But
Yeah.
most of the kids that hung in there and just into it, bit
Hmm.
into that poetry food, just loved it and stayed with it. And even the ones that said, I am not into this, and told me what I could do with it, later came back to me and said, I said I didn't want to go there, but a couple of those poems haunted me, and I really liked
Hmm.
it later. So that most of it, if it didn't
Interesting.
resonate with them right away, it did eventually. And I do want to say that I think it was 95% of all the kids that took writer seminar, they could take it up to 3 times for 3 elective credits. 95% of them took it up to 3 times. So I thought that said something about poetry and how
Right.
to them. And we also looked at other genres as well.
Excellent. And it's wonderful to hear that, that a lot of young people and people that are not as in tune with poetry can really connect with it. And maybe it takes a little bit of time. I mean, I've heard studies that, say that, 7% of people and have said they've read a poem in the last year, things like that. And so that kind of makes me feel like a little less appreciated. But knowing that, there are people out there that connect with it and really get it, even when they're, just learning about it is very positive and affirming for me. So, it's great to share those stories and let other viewers hear those things. So, if you want, you can share a poem with us now of your own poetry.
Okay, I'll do that. This is a poem that I just feel like I should probably share this one, even though this is a poem that I've shared a lot. But since we're talking about students, this is
Hmm.
a poem that's considered my signature poem. This is
Okay.
a poem that has been requested more than any other poem out of my poems about students, and this is from my book Fragile Capacities,
Okay.
and it's called Palms Monday. No one seems to understand his agenda, not even Keon, nor can he tell you where he last saw his book, when he last bought a pencil, why he picks trash from the floor, eats it, then washes it down with his last piece of notebook paper. He parades into her class, wants daily to chart his own seat. He is the opening act in English. His box hair cut at the peak, a fan waving red, matches lips colored CoverGirl vintage wine, ditto t shirt and jeans that hug the bottom of crimson underwear. Scarlet shoelaces grip Terra Rosa high top Keds. Keon struts all shades, but deodorant's the last thing he remembers to wear. He knows her eyes will shaft him and her big horse lips flap if she doesn't see both hands on top of the desk. She's a crazy woman. She demands that he work. She won't let him touch his stuff. She wants to put out his fire. She's his biggest censor. She reams him each time his hand sneaks into his biggest pocket and under the charm. She hovers over him, a tormenting fly, screams, if the day ever comes when you turn in one assignment, I'll be so shocked, I swear I'll do a cartwheel for you. 2 months later, he marks himself present and, like a faith healer, announces he's got the miracle she wants. These chosen lines from Romeo and Juliet. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hands too much. Which mannerly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. On red construction paper, he printed those lines and with a black marker traced his hand over them. Students in 128 chant, cartwheel, cartwheel. They always memorize a promise. She shrugs her shoulders. She has pants on. She has no excuse. Spins the first awkward cartwheel since 12 and curtsies for Keon. His gold teeth grin and ruby nose ring sparkles. Their eyes meet for the first time. She sees child. He sees teacher.
Huh. There's some interesting, what do you say, interactions going on there. It's a very interactive poem. You know what? And my first thought is a book by John Updike called The Centaur. I don't know if you're familiar with that. He has a
Forgot about
teacher
that
that's
one.
yeah, he's a teacher, but he's sort of embodied as a centaur in the what do you call it in the book, the the main the father figure in that book. And that's what I think of that. It sort of embodies that, I guess, the profession, or the situation of teaching, and there's a sensuality going on. There's some playfulness, and it's interesting. It's very raw. Thank you for sharing that.
Very much. Thanks.
So, and you don't do just poetry, and I'm curious about this. You also do urban fiction. So I'm wondering, what are the aesthetics of what is called urban fiction?
Well, have not, I haven't written any fiction in quite some time, but I think that the biggest difference between fiction and poetry is the brevity. I think that
Hmm.
the qualities are basically the same. I think that a good story, I think any good story begins in medias res, in the middle of things.
Right.
And I think poetry, any good poet is generally thrifty with words.
Hmm.
A good poet uses as few words as possible to say as much as possible. But I think that a good poet uses concrete nouns and action verbs to create the power of a poem. But I think that a good fiction writer does the same thing. I really think that, so
Hmm.
that's where they're closely connected. Um, but for the most part, my most of my writing has been and with poetry. I would like to write more memoir. That's kind of something that I would
Huh.
really like to kind of dabble into more.
Right.
Lately, I've been doing more venturing actually the outside of the genre of poetry and looking at photography as well. So that's what I've been doing lately.
Fun. So yeah, photography is like a totally different thing.
Yeah,
It's like you're out there in the physical world and you're observing, and they're more introverted when you're writing. You're thinking and you're constructing things in your head. I think is it, but there's a lot of observation that goes with being able to do that.
yeah,
So it would be interesting to see, you write some memoirs and some good, even memoir poetry. Would be interesting to see that
yeah.
how that plays out.
Well, most
Yeah.
of my poetry is autobiographical or biographical. A
Hmm.
lot of my poetry is about my own experiences in my life, or I will write about another person's life. I did do a lot of work years ago in poetry therapy, and
Hmm.
that a lot of that uses ekphrasis, where you write about another painting or photography in reference to or in reaction to that, or vice versa. Sometimes other genres, visual artists will paint in response to a poet. But I'm very interested in the healing aspects of how evocative poetry is and how evocative all the creative arts are, and what they do for us, on our
Hmm.
journey.
Are you
I don't
familiar?
know. Go ahead.
there's a writer named Rafael Campo. I believe he was a physician, or he is a physician and a poet as well. And he writes on the sort of bridge between the medical humanities and poetry, and how, the scientific community is very objective and kind of almost callous in a way. And then you bring them poetry and the emotions pour out. So there's a book called The Desire to Heal I'm reading right now. And I thought it was interesting you mentioned the emotional capabilities of writing and poetry, and it's a very subjective process, and that brings out your humanity, really. I mean, what do you think of that?
I agree. I think that it does say something about universally
Hmm?
our humanity. I mean, when you think about, for instance, uh, that President Biden decided to have an inaugural poet, there aren't too
Right.
many presidents that determined that they wanted to have that. And I think
Hmm.
that say something about those presidents and that
Right.
important facet that they wanted in their program. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the first United States hospital in our country, which was Pennsylvania Hospital, was founded by Ben Franklin in
Uh-huh.
1751, and that hospital used all creative arts as ancillary treatments for mental patients.
Interesting. I'd be
And
curious to hear
writing
more about that.
and writing poetry was a daily activity for patients and their work to be, you know, to work on being healed and whatever their problems were daily. And I think that's just fascinating to know that in 1751 in our country that was going on. I love that.
Right. It's a, everlasting process. I think all throughout history, we even have the oral storytellers that are kind of trying to observe what's going on and absorb it and write these, or put together these stories that kind of explain, what is it with reality? What is the challenge we face? I think that's so powerful, about writing and poetry and storytelling, that we've done it for since the beginning, since we could speak practically, composed at the fireside. And I like how you say, that the establishing a inaugural poet sort of speaks for the president or his administration and what he intends. What do you expect from, as far as, I don't know, the arts and and government, and what do you hope that incorporating, like Amanda Gorman into the inauguration may say to the world about us as a nation?
Well, I'm very encouraged by this because I know first of all that Jill Biden is an educator.
Hmm.
I know that um, she's a real teacher advocate, and I think that selecting an African American poet and a very young beginning poet. No, don't get me wrong. I think she's a
Hmm.
wonderful poet in her own right, but she
Hmm.
is very young, and I think
Right.
that 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 was that was very purposeful in selecting somebody that
Hmm.
young. I know I read some articles where there's some criticism about that. What about so and so who's been writing for years, and why couldn't they have selected that? But I really think that that was done purposely to say, hey, let's embrace the young folks that are starting artistically
Right.
well. We don't always have to give that huge of a moment to somebody that's
Hmm.
been at it all the time. It's uh,
And I'm sure older poets have had plenty of those similar opportunities, and putting her on the pedestal for that moment, it sort of in a way testifies to, hey, this is what we're expecting for the future.
absolutely.
I think it was a great, process. I mean, I think it was wonderful they chose her. I mean, you can say what you would like about the quality of the poetry or the performance. It's a good
Right.
statement.
And I don't know if you're aware of this, but she had a speech impediment
Huh?
that she struggled with for quite some time up until I think about 4 years ago, which you wouldn't know that
Right.
except for reading about it. And I also appreciate the fact that they selected her to show, look how far she's come.
Right.
and to just celebrate that, and to have, the courage at any age to get up there and to share.
And she did. The performance was excellent.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, I didn't really care for the poem as reading it as much as watching her perform it. I mean, that's my personal
yeah,
opinion. I enjoyed watching her perform it
yeah,
because I thought it had power, and I thought she flowed it well, just flowed into the words, and
absolutely.
that was wonderful.
I agree with you. If I were, I'm being really awful here. If I were grading the poem, I might have written a couple of suggestions, but
Hmm.
her performance was impeccable, and that's
Yes.
a lot about poetry and delivery and how important delivery is. If you deliver a poem impeccably, even if it's a poem that maybe could use a little more work, which I mean, all my poems need work, but
They're
if
never
you
done.
have to deliver it, then that gives it a heightened quality that can, you know, give it some added oomph, I guess. And I
Right.
just did that beautifully, just beautifully. I couldn't have done that when
Absolutely.
I was her age, or even now.
Me either. I wasn't even courageous enough to stand in front of a classroom sometimes.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, it's very tough to be a public speaker of any sort.
yeah.
And we have about a remaining 4 or 5 minutes, and I have one additional question. I'm curious, what is change course, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, change course. That was a study for teachers that was created at Wright State. I don't even want to tell you how many years ago. It was in the mid 90s, and they selected 12 teachers nationally, and they wanted to really just help us and actually give us money to help our classrooms
Hmm?
and to really get to know us and support us and our needs in our schools. And it was so wonderful. And one of the things that I really learned through that program was the use of children's books in a high school classroom.
Wow.
When they first said that to me, I thought, I'm going to be eaten alive. I can imagine. They were so right. And I don't know why I didn't realize that at first. But, when you think about it, there's so many kids who aren't read to in their homes.
Right.
And so there are kids that are going to embrace it even at an older age, and when you look at so many children's books have adult themes that are so important.
Hmm.
The children's writer Eve Bunting has, she's got a book called Terrible Things, which is an allegory for the Holocaust.
Oh,
She
wow.
has books on homelessness,
Hmm?
very poignant, pertinent topics that are so key to social justice and things that are going on
Hmm.
in the past and now, and they worked so well, and a lot of them were excellent writing prompts in my classroom too. So I learned so much, and it was just really wonderful experience.
That sounds quite interesting, and quite an opportunity to learn new things. And I'm glad you had that opportunity. And hoping that people continue the process of learning about poetry and so forth. So we have about a couple of extra minutes if you want to do some shout outs or some thank yous to inspirations that you've had over the years. Add some extra words of encouragement to future writers.
Oh, I just feel so fortunate to have had the students that I've had, and all the teachers that I've had. Nick Maciosi is my favorite teacher, and he's a
Mhm.
prolific writer today. But I guess I think I want to end maybe with one poem. My dad has dementia, and he is, I owe really everything to him. He taught me how to read, more in some ways in elementary school than my own teachers, and he instilled in me the love for books. And
Okay.
he gave me the book A Child's Garden of Verses, which is
Hmm.
really what got me to love poetry. So I really owe it to my dad. So I'll just read one short poem.
Okay.
Um, Beyond recognition, you enter childhood home, Find Dad slouched, asleep in his recliner, surrounded by history books, his old published editorials, holding a picture of himself during his Otterbein graduation. CNN ruptures in a volume so invasive Jesus would rethink his second coming. You wake him, he launches a Rolodex of stories his mind still puzzles and you nearly have memorized. He stops abruptly. Mom's been gone 3 years now. I say it's actually been 10 months, but that he's right that it feels like 3 years. I ask if he wants coffee with me in the backyard. I had plenty of sunshine when I was a kid. I ask if he's ready to take his shower. I'm tired of being a prisoner in my own home. You girls always cracking the whip. He tosses a sardonic grin, shakes his head. He doesn't want my help to stand, then shuffles into an hour bathroom rote, his 57th year of showers in this Columbus Ranch home. In his tiny office, I return his college photo back to its place on a shelf, a makeshift shrine Mom made above his electric typewriter. On the typewriter carriage, I find a three-line message. Please, God, help me to remember. Please, God, please, God, help me to doctor, remember things. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a deeply personal and touching poem. I appreciate you sharing that, and it's a great tribute. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us on the program today, Sandra. It's been a wonderful talk. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and I am Dustin Pickering. And we've talked with Sandra Feen today, and it's been an excellent conversation about poetry, students, and education. So anybody out there can join us on the program who wants a platform, get in touch with us at Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. We'd love to hear from you. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Please subscribe to our channel if you have not already. We'd love for subscribers. We'd love to hear comments on our programming. Anything you want to say, critical or any questions you have, please leave the comments there in the YouTube and subscribe. We're looking for 1 million subscribers, so help us out a little bit out there. And thank you very much for our viewers who are already participating and watching us. And we have a donation space available, paypal.me/nyparrot. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Thank you, Sandra. Thank our viewers, and I hope to see you tomorrow at another place and time here on the New York Parrot Literary Corner.